members, and especially as volunteers. I'm Esther McGinnis. I'm the director of the NDSU Extension Master Gardener program and also an associate professor within the Department of Plant Sciences.
I am Emily Howe. I am an NDSU Extension agent in the counties for horticulture, and I am the Generation Z representative here today.
Hello, I'm so glad to see so many of you joining us. I am Rachelle Vettern. I am a professor and the Leadership and Volunteer Development Specialist for North Dakota State University Extension. And I think I've met some or many of you at the National Extension Conference on Volunteerism. Some people are like, how did you end up with this piece or presenting to this group? And there are so many very cool Master Gardener coordinators that I meet and Master Gardeners at that National Extension Conference on Volunteerism, or through our Achieving the Extension Mission Through Volunteers course that we offer in the North Central region. So thank you for joining us today. After last year's presentation that I did on the generations, like Ann and Ashley mentioned, I knew I needed to get some experts in with me that knew more about horticulture and Gen Z specifically. So I'm so grateful to Esther and Emily for presenting with me today. So our goals with this program for today, as you walk away from this, are to really help you recognize those specific characteristics of Gen Z volunteers, because we have so many of those individuals who want to volunteer with us in extension. Help you kind of think through the similarities and differences of Gen Z volunteers in the community and volunteer settings. Emily and Esther are going to help you think through and identify plant and sustainability topics that really appeal to that generation of volunteers, and really think through some effective strategies for working with them in volunteer settings. Emily and Esther are specifically going to talk about what are some of the things they like as far as recognition, as far as recruitment, as far as event planning. So we have a lot to share in a short amount of time today, and we look forward to having you ask questions in the chat, be interactive. We have some activities built in. So I'm going to drop one more time in the chat, the Google Drive that has the handout, kind of a worksheet, a handout about Gen Z, and then there's a flyer about our Achieving the Extension Mission course in there. So with that, we'll go to the next slide, Esther, if we can. And just quickly to get your brains thinking here, I'd like you to look at these age-related cohorts or generations and find out where you're at as a generation, which one you think you are, and then go ahead and put that into the chat. Which one are you? Are you a Gen Z? Are you an Xer, a millennial, a boomer? We probably have maybe a couple silents on here, depending. Great, I see that. We already have Xer Z silence. Wonderful. Today, one of the things about, as we talk about generations, last year we talked about all of them as volunteering with us, but this year we're really going to focus on that group that was born between 1997 and 2014. Those are our posts, or our Gen Zs, or sometimes you'll hear them called iGen or post millennials, but I think the Gen Z piece is kind of stuck. And so we're going to focus on that group. We know a little bit about Gen Alpha, but not too much, because they are still pretty young. They're volunteering for us a little bit, but we're going to really focus on that Gen Z piece. And as you see, the age-related cohorts switch about every 20 years. Our generations do, depending on the defining event, like World War II, the Vietnam War, different things that kind of shift what's happening in the world and make generations think a little bit differently. An example, the silent generation really, and even the baby boomers kind of are more fiscally conservative because they had parents or grew up in the generations where we went through the Depression. I know with the boomers, we even see a little bit of that carryover. So certain specific things that happen really do influence our generation. And we're going to explore the Z's today. I see a bunch of Xers on here, so I was looking at the chat. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily, and she's going to talk a little bit more about some cuspers.
Hi, so I am technically a cusper. I was born in January of 1997, so I really am just on the edge of the millennial Gen Z Cusp. So cuspers are people that are born at one end of one generation and the beginning of the other. They often feel comfortable with both generations and tend to be good mediators, translators, and mentors for the different generations. So since generations tend to linger longer in rural areas, many of these individuals tend to be cuspers. This can be due to lower populations, less cultural changes occurring due to news, media, those sorts of things getting to them a little bit later. Um, and so with that, I'm gonna go ahead and say it here, but I will repeat myself later. We don't bash generations. Each generation is different and important in their own way. Um, and generations can change and it's just a viewpoint. So we do not bash generations. And Esther, you can go to the next one.
Whoops.
Um,
There we go.
Yeah. So we're going to take a minute and we're going to do a reflection activity. If you printed off that reflection or handout that was posted in the Google Drive, or even if you didn't, just take a minute and a pencil and pen, and we're going to fill that out and just reflect on who your influencers were, different slogans, characteristics, myths, stereotypes, those sorts of things. Just take a minute, do that. And then what we'll do is waterfall chat. I'll give y'all a minute to type everything in and then we'll all hit enter at the same time and it'll come in like a waterfall. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. Okay, just give you guys a couple more minutes. If you have your reflection completed, go ahead and write out what you think might be something that is similar with Gen Z, whether it's a slogan or a life event factor or influence, somebody who influenced. So like Beyonce could have influenced both millennials and Gen Z individuals or some differences. And then we'll all hit enter. All right, so you guys want to hit enter and see what all the differences and similarities are with Gen Z, see what you go, what we have show up. We do not have cassette tapes in Gen Z. I do say that one. But fun story, my mom is actually a boomer, so I did have a tape player growing up, and I did ruin several tapes for her as a child.
Oh, I've got fond memories of making mixtapes as a teenager.
I know about the pencil and you have to wind the tape back. Yes, I am very familiar with that one. Um, So I had the individuals in my office do this as well, because I can only answer for Gen Z. I can't answer for anything else. So some of the answers that I got for the millennial was flip phones, those razor phones in schools being a big thing. Everybody had to go to college. Planking, uh, that social media trend for Gen X, the President Reagan Clinton scandal, Friends TV show, plaid baggy jeans. That was a very specific one that I was supposed to mention was plaid baggy jeans. Whatever being the slang. Some for my generation, Taylor Swift, Beyonce. I remember Barack Obama being elected, everybody being pulled out of the classroom and doing that. Just Do It was a big slogan, but not for Nike. It was when, oh goodness, now I can't remember his name, went a little off the deep end and posted a YouTube video of him screaming, "Just do it," into the camera. But one thing that we all had in common throughout our evaluations that I did with my office is for myths. We all said that a common myth with our generation was that we're lazy. And Esther, if you want to go to the next slide. This is something that is common. This is based off of everything that we're seeing is that generational cohorts believe that the generations following them have challenges. But as you can see from some of these magazine covers and this activity, these challenges are documented and it's not a new phenomenon. We all believe that each generation is the me generation. So this is natural, but rather than being fearful, we need to learn to build into each generation's strengths and make community workplaces a positive experience. So once again, we don't bash other generations. This is something like we're all in this together. We need to really lean into other generations and see the positive with each one.
So just to quickly explore some of the different characteristics or defining events of this generation, and Emily mentioned some of them. Just a reference in that Google Drive, there is a handout that covers more in depth some of the general characteristics of Gen Z. But again, as Emily said, we don't want to totally stereotype. We understand that each generation has each Gen Z has their unique characteristics. There are just some things that they have preferences about or prefer. Some of they have had shared experiences as a generational cohort. And so we just like to share some of those. And if you think about what Gen Z has experienced more recently as young people, you can kind of see we had that great recession from 2007 to 9. And so when they were growing up, they really experienced that piece where family families were more fiscally conservative because they had to be. This generation really thinks about money and saving. They're better about saving money. They're thinking about investing. They're thinking about ways to make money in a different way than some of the other generations more recently. I would say some of it even looks a little bit the way that they conserve in some cases, like that the generations that went through the Depression. Not quite as much, but they definitely think through their money issues, are more aware than some other generations. Unfortunately, they've experienced or really understand how to take care of themselves during mass shootings. The Sandy Hook one was one of the big ones in the media, but they are very much more savvy about what you do if there's an active shooter situation. I know growing up as an Xer, I didn't even have to think about that. My children that are Zs have actually been the ones who've told me or taught me kind of what you need to do, even though we've had a little practice here on campus. Some positive things, there's been the Marriage Equity Act, so they're used to everyone really being able to have that opportunity to be married. The Affordable Care Act, which allowed access to health care. One of the things they're very concerned about as we do research in the world of 4-H and youth development in general is the vaping epidemic and what that's doing to their generation and what the future impacts will be to that. We obviously know and have talked a lot about the COVID pandemic and how that's affected them both from an academic standpoint and socially. So as we think about Gen Z volunteers, they're really excited about getting out and being with people and meeting people, but they also might be, again, a little shy or need some help breaking the ice because of that pandemic and basically being locked in their bedrooms, going to school for 2 years. So at least, Emily talked about the social media piece and that being a very important. We were talking and you don't do as much with hashtags or talk or use hashtag, but we still use them to search things or we'll post it so that you can find things. And the one normalized normal bodies, this generation very much so is more in tune to being accepting. They want to be healthy, but they want to embrace all kind of body types and not have to be that stick skinny like they used to be. They want that healthy piece and being accepting of others. If you look at influencers, Emily kind of touched on some of those. They are more influenced by other Gen Zs that are their generation that they're watching on TikTok and other places like Instagram, more so than a lot of the ones that other generations were influenced by. But they really do still look up to LeBron, Beyonce, Taylor Swift. During the Olympics, we were talking about how Snoop Dogg really resonated with all generations. So he was kind of one that cut across all of that. All right, Esther, you can go to the next slide. Characteristics, and Emily and Esther are really going to touch on this specifically with Master Gardener volunteers, so I won't talk too much, but you can kind of look at these yourself. Again, very digitally savvy. If you think about, they like to be independent, but they still do like to be with their friends. Very competitive, have been raised to be competitive in whether that's in an orchestra competition or a sporting competition, a competitive generation, that's for sure. What I love about them is they're skeptical, but not doubtful. They have a little more positive look to their world than say maybe the Xers or the Boomers or others did. Very much so. And again, you can see those values. They value social advocacy, financial stability. They're very accepting. That first bullet point on the slide, racially and ethnically diverse, and just diversity in general, very much want to be inclusive and including. And so as you think about designing your Gen Z volunteer experience, very important that you're embracing all forms of diversity. All right, Esther, we can go to the next slide and I will turn it over to you, Esther.
Sounds great. Well, I get to talk a little bit about communicating with Gen Z, and that can be a little bit of a challenge because they use a lot of slang. So if you have kids at home that are using slang, sometimes it feels like they're speaking a foreign language. Fortunately, we can look these words up, and we have a reputable source in the oxfordlanguages.com. So they've got Oxford Word of the Year, and the 2023 Word of the Year is Riz. This is a derivative from charisma, and it means style, charm, attractiveness to a potential romantic partner. And this was coined by Tom Holland, or at least made popular by Tom Holland, saying that he has no riz. Um, some other runner-ups were Swifty. I think we all know Swifty, de-influencing, beige flag, parasocial. Some of these I haven't heard at all. But one point I really wanted to make is that Gen Z can find it off-putting if my generation, which is X, or boomers or silents, attempt to use their slang. It just does not seem to work when we use their slang, or maybe I'm just not hip enough, and hip being a slang word from when I was younger too. But I do have a story where I was doing a little social experiment on my 18-year-old daughter and my 21-year-old her cousin, and we had taken them on an excursion in Duluth, Minnesota, touring around. And then throughout the day, I just started dropping a little bit of Gen Z slang. At first there was just startled looks, and then it became, hysterical laughter. And then they retaliated by looking up 1980s slang and trying to drop that on me, like gag me with a spoon. So what I learned from that experience is that I cannot authentically start dropping Gen Z slang, and I think we have to be careful. So for the most part, we shouldn't be using Gen Z slang um, because we're in a professional environment, so we want to maintain that professionality. But at the same time, we may need to use maybe just a touch of slang if we're designing social media, and we'll cover that at the end. But even if we use slang in social media, I would still say run it past a Gen Zer to make sure that there are no unintended meanings of what we're using. Different modes of preferred communication exist between the generations. So we start off with the silence, having more traditional forms of communication in letters and phone. As we move into the Xers, we have a more direct approach, but it's a little bit more distant from direct communication or direct face-to-face communication. We like writing emails. We'll leave voicemail. We'll message each other on social media. And then as we move into millennials and Gen Z, there's more social media and texting. And particularly for the Gen Zers, they appreciate face-to-face input at work. That seems to be something very important to them. They want feedback, and they want it often. So for them, it's just a little bit of a mix there. And this is really interesting. They have phone anxiety, and I remember as a Gen Xer, I was always on the phone talking with my friends. This is not the same with Gen Z. There was a recent study from Australia showing that Gen Z does suffer from phone anxiety. They would rather not talk on the phone, and this extends to family members. And when it comes to handling sensitive issues, they would rather text than to have a phone conversation or face to face. So this extends to breakups, and there have been some celebrity breakups that have been done over text. Now, in this survey, they found that awkward telephone conversations were one of the top 3 things they wanted to avoid. Um, so this can be a problem for master gardener programs around the country. We may have, a plant clinic hotline where we're answering phones, answering questions. This may be a little scary to some of our brand new Gen Z volunteers. So we want to make sure that we make them comfortable with it. Maybe providing them with a script, and, helping them get some experience, and maybe practicing a little bit.
So generations also look for different things within their communities. Boomers are wanting more of those retail experiences, where millennials are more wanting something entertaining. They want to be entertained, or they want something where their whole family and kids can be involved. Um, Gen Z is wanting safety, diversity, and inclusion. A lot of this can come into just that sense of belonging. They want to feel like they belong. One easy way to really make a Gen Z volunteer feel like they belong is to remember little details. So what is the name of their plants, or not the name of their plants, their animals, what plants they have, relating to them. One way I usually relate to my volunteers is my lawn is not perfect and I don't care. But also other things such as remembering pronouns, preferred names, can be a really important part. And knowing that, you know, they prefer to be called by their middle name, not their first name, or that they prefer the they them pronoun rather than a he her pronoun, can be really important to make them feel like they belong in a environment, and it can also make them feel safe in that environment, which are really big proponents for Gen Z.
Oop, my mic was muted. Sorry, I was typing in the chat. Just as some of you have been messaging on the side, I've been watching the chat, just to let you know that as Esther and the rest of us have referenced some different things, we have a long list of references that will be at the end of the PowerPoint presentation. We will be putting a PDF of these PowerPoint slides in the Google Drive that I've been sharing. We just didn't have that in there before because we wanted to surprise you. No, cover this information ahead of time. So the references will list all of those different pieces. And at the end, we can have Esther pull out that specific reference that you were asking about in there. So back to Gen Z volunteering and service learning. Last year when I talked, I mentioned that Gen Zs, again, and I'll cover it again, Gen Zs want a little bit different experience out of their volunteering than other generations, and the fact that this generation in the research shows us that they really want to not only just collect food for the food shelf or the food pantry, but they want to talk about how to end hunger or start addressing hunger or changing policies so we don't have to face as much hunger in the world, in our country. And so we will see starting early on that they have talked about things like it's okay that we got get food for the food shelf, but what can we do to change policy? While I work in North Dakota, I live in Minnesota, and one of the things our youth fought for, and adults, was to have free school lunch provided across the state. The research came out after the pandemic that it really made a difference in learning. So a lot of our youth and adults advocated that we find funding for that to happen across the state, and it is happening post-pandemic, and so far we've seen a lot of success in schools because kids aren't hungry when they go to school. They're able to focus on learning. That came out of a lot of discussions from youth being the advocates for that. We have seen in 4-H, and I'm sure many of you are leading those the hunger gardens where youth want to really grow food and donate food to the food pantry. I know Emily has one of those in her county. I've seen a lot of our extension agents have something like that. They want to do more to address that issue. What can they do? They've met with decision makers. So thinking through how they can be advocates and really make a change. So not just give a man to fish, but teach a man to fish, or woman to fish, or individual to fish, I should say. So they want different experiences. Not that they're not willing to help out with those, but I think in the world of master gardeners, this is a great chance for them to think and talk about how we really change some of these things systematically. One of the things as they get into the working world too, they really want to work for a company perhaps that offers an opportunity to volunteer or get paid time to volunteer. I know with Microsoft, a lot of the different banks like US Bank, some of those companies are really offering that as an option to be a corporate volunteer and take time to volunteer in their communities. So those are some great places to find volunteers too. They also really do enjoy volunteering with other generations. So that bottom bullet up, having the opportunity to practice youth adult partnerships or young adult and adult partnerships of really working together to address different issues and volunteer together to make a difference. All right, on to the next slide. And I think this is, where do you find them? We had a lot of discussion about this, and we would love to have your input on this too, if you want to put anything in the chat. Outreach ideas, probably not the newspaper. We don't have too many, although there are still some of those weekly newspapers that are out there. I know in our community we have one, and it does have all of the different activity pictures from our local schools in the community. So some of them might take a look to see if they're in that physical paper, but otherwise thinking about other outlets. We've talked about Snapchat and Instagram being the places. I just checked with my Gen Z 16-year-old and she said, yep, that's where you're going to find me, Mom. They are on TikTok, but if you're like us in North Dakota, we can't have TikTok on our technology because of some of the implications of that. So that isn't really an option for us in North Dakota as much as Instagram and Snapchat. YouTube videos, a great place to talk about your volunteer experiences that you offer, those opportunities. They still do, and Emily might talk about this, like those flyers with QR codes so they can take a picture of it and remember that and have it on their phone. And you can see some of those young professional groups, college campuses, faith communities, garden centers, and Esther's going to talk a little bit more about that. They will volunteer independently, but they do love to hear about that it was a successful experience from friends and maybe go with next time. And making it a group social activity, making it obviously fun are really some ways to gather or get those Gen Zs or where to find them. So I'll have you go to the next slide. I think this is Esther's.
And I wanted to share the experience that we've had in the NDSU Extension Master Gardener program. So I've been here about 11 years. At the very beginning, we would have garden centers that would pay for and sign up their employees for the Master Gardener Core course and to become volunteers. Um, at first, I was getting rather disenchanted because a lot of these people did not complete their internship and they really had no intention of volunteering. So we then tried to funnel these individuals into the Pro Hort program, but more recently, we've discovered that this is kind of reversed. Garden centers are actually still paying for tuition for their employees. They want the knowledge, but we've discovered that some of these employees are some of our best master gardeners. They complete their internship and become certified volunteers, and they've had a lot of leadership skills. So we've been really, really pleased. So this was an unexpected source for us, but it changed. And I think it's because there's been more Gen Z employees and they're used to volunteering. That's really part of their ethic. And that really lends itself to talking about, other outreach methods. So we need to meet them where they are. I've been part of other discussions with respect to millennials. So we've talked about, having cocktail making classes, teaching them how to, in fact, make bitters and such. But that appeals more to millennials. If we look at Gen Z, they're experiencing the sober curious movement. So mocktails are a big thing. So in order to reach them, if we're using, offering educational classes, maybe have a mocktail making class where they utilize, local fruits and herbs. As we do our outreach and recruiting, we need to be authentic about who we are. Gen Z is incredibly intelligent. They can sense if we're trying to be trendy and that's really not part of us. I mean, they can. I'm really impressed with them. Instead, we should go back and focus on the meaning and purpose of our organization, both Extension and the Extension Master Gardener program. You would find that our meaning and purpose actually does resonate with them because a lot of what we stand for is relevant and actionable by these volunteers. We have to think about inclusivity, and I would say radical inclusivity. So more than just kind of our standard, check the boxes, more than just, focusing on race and ethnicity, but going beyond. Transgender is a big issue among Gen Z, and they are very, very loyal to their friends that are transgender. So we cannot, discriminate against transgender. We have to be very welcoming and inclusive. And that may mean, customize or getting our older master gardeners more accustomed to that. Other things to think about our Gen Z are very primed for volunteerism because They had to volunteer when they were in high school. They had to do these volunteer service projects, and that has continued into college. So they're accustomed to this. So that's good for us to know because they are natural volunteers. If we have Gen Z that are um, if we have Gen Z employees and volunteers that are part of it, have them be our brand ambassadors. Um, they're absolutely fabulous to have to recruit others and be, absolutely welcoming.
So a few subjects that resonates really strongly with the members of the Gen Z community are things such as climate change, waste reduction, really focusing on native, what is local to the area that they are growing in, realizing that a lot of these native plants are beneficial to the pollinators. And they're also really passionate about the recognition of other pollinators. So monarchs and honeybees have really great PR teams. They get a lot of really great publicity. We have beautiful photos of them, but there's other insects such as our bumblebees and some of the sweat bees that we have that are really great pollinators that don't have as great of a PR team. So Gen Z is really passionate about those. The bee hotels, stem nesting bees are really great ways that you can start getting them passionate about those more native pollinators. Other things such as chaos gardening are really fun. So that top picture, it has a little bumblebee in it if you can see it, but it's more focused on the chaos in that picture. You can see there's 3 or 4 different plants in there, and that is my chaos garden that I did with my junior master gardeners. So this was really fun and simple. I just gave them a bunch of seeds and said, plant the garden. And they did. And when it came time to see what was coming up, it was whatever came up from those seeds that was planted. And it did surprisingly well. We had a lot of zucchinis and beans and cucumbers come out of that garden plot, even though it was planted really randomly. But that is a form of gardening that they are intrigued in, and not having those picture perfect rows. Um, and reminding them that, you don't have to have a perfect area. Houseplants and succulents are still really popular. We have a really fabulous collection of houseplants and succulents in the International Peace Garden here in North Dakota. I believe it is one of the largest collections of succulents within the United States. And a lot of our master gardeners like to volunteer with those and help out in the conservatory with those houseplants. They can also be a really easy way to connect with other members of Gen Z, asking questions such as like, what is your favorite houseplant? Or have you heard of the goldfish plant? Are really easy ways to start a conversation with them about a topic that they're comfortable talking about. There's also a lot of mental health connections with houseplants. There's several studies that I've read about how houseplants can improve mental health in different environments. And a lot of Gen Z will consider themselves plant parents. So they have their plants and they take care of those. My husband works in a concrete box, literally. He has no windows, one door, and it's very bland and dull and not a nice place, but he enjoys his houseplant. He went out and he got to pick out his very own houseplant. He chose a whale fin snake plant because he liked the name, and that is his plant. And he has had members of his office come in and look at the plant, and they all get this joy from this plant. So even in office settings, Gen Z is really into the houseplants. Esther, I think this is.
Sorry, have to unmute here. I'm going to talk about a study that was done by by Natalie Baumgartner, and I believe Sherry Dorn and Alicia Rinn were also on this paper. So I feel a little awkward because these are Master Gardener coordinators within our community, but I don't see them on the call here today. But this is a fabulous paper to read, and like we mentioned, this will be in our references. But it's very informative, and it talks about interest in topic area by gardening experience level. They did a survey where they surveyed over 2,000 individuals about their interests in gardening. Were they gardeners? Were they not? What is their experience level? What sorts of topics resonate with them? So as we look at this figure, you can see the number of participants on the side. As we go across the x-axis, we have experience level. So we've got the newbies, less than 1 year, 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5 years. Then we get into people with more experience, 6 to 10 years, greater than 10 years. As we look at the bars, dark blue is vegetable gardening, orange is growing houseplants, gray is landscaping, yellow is flower gardening, and blue is other. Now, in doing previous work with millennials, the conversation has been about the fact that millennials are very interested in vegetable gardening, edibles and growing houseplants, but less interested in ornamental aspects. But it looks like things are evolving. And you can see that there's now some interest in landscaping and in flower gardening. So this is good news for us because they're interested in all the different areas that we in fact operate. So that's great news for Master Gardener programs. So here's the second part of that same figure, and it shows gardening participation by generation. And that's really kind of fun to see. So we've got our total survey participants of over 2,100, and we look at percent of sample. As we look at the column starting from the bottom, the silent generation is in dark blue. The baby boomers are in orange. Gray would be Gen Xers, and that's because I've got gray hair. No, I'm not on this study. Millennials are in yellow, and then Gen Z would be the light blue. Probably about a little over or a little under a fourth of these individuals do not participate in gardening, but look at the third column. That's what we should be focusing on. And that's telling us from this survey what percentages of the gardening public broken down by generation. That's very useful because you'll see that if we combine Gen Z and the millennials, that's way over 50% now. So we have to be very conscious of this. And keep in mind, Gen Z is going to continue to get more and more into gardening. Our youngest Gen Z students are still in high school. But as they, transition into college, into, having their own apartments and homes, this is going to continue to blossom. To date, we just have not discussed mental health, but this is a very important concept to Gen Z. This is a fabulous study done by Alicia Rinn and Bridget Behe, and they look at horticultural marketing. That's their specialty. They were surveying participants, trying to see what plant benefits resonated for the different generations, and whether that influenced their desire to purchase plants. So 3 benefits were studied with respect to this table. So what are the benefits from plants and how can they help you socially relate and connect with others? What are the benefits from plants that it can improve your physical well-being? Well, that will impact your willingness to purchase. And then the third benefit is how plants can improve your emotional and mental health. Now, we're not going to look at the entire table. We're just going to focus on the yellow box, the Gen Z. The scale is 1 to 7. It's a Likert scale. 1 is least likely to impact your purchasing, and 7 is most likely to impact purchasing plants. Within the column, they're all statistically significant. So Gen Z is interested in social benefits and in improving their well-being, but really their number one out of the three is going to be how this can improve their emotional and mental health. So very important to consider as we do programming to them.
So when we're trying to retain the Gen Z volunteers that we've recruited, making sure that the volunteering experience is a social, exciting time can be really beneficial. So making sure there's activities or a social time before or after, but mainly ways to connect with each other without social pressure. There's social pressure, they're less likely to attend to the program. That's where including it as a group activity, having them bring their friends can be really beneficial. I also demonstrate the need for volunteers. Going back to what we're passionate about, we want to make that change in the world. Why are you doing this volunteer experience? Explaining the why, having the mission and the goal up front. We are doing this hunger-free garden. The hunger-free garden directly benefits food pantries in our local area, feeding the people in our local area that need fresh fruits and vegetables. Easy way to do it. Communicates the impact, the need, all those things that are interesting to Gen Z. But going beyond that, be vocal about why you need it in your extension office. Lean on the mission statements that your state has for master gardeners, which for most states summed up is be the extension to the extension office. Help us deliver this educational material to the community. Be vocal about that. Let them know that this is what the position is. It's not just to weed out gardens all day. And respect those boundaries. Is this something that you're okay with? Don't put somebody who is uncomfortable with public speaking in a public speaking position. If they would rather answer emails from a plant hotline, allow them to do that. Be respectful of those boundaries. Manage things like you would in an office professionally. They are giving up their time and energy to do this, and they want to be treated with respect in the same way that you would treat an employee. And overall, avoid condensation and negativity at all costs. Once again, this goes back to Esther's statement of radical inclusion, just really making sure that if there is something that you see that is not okay, shut it down immediately. Make them feel like they belong in this opportunity and this thing. There's so many different ways that we as Gen Z are able to communicate through direct messaging, through our social media accounts, that if we have a bad experience, we will say something. And we will say something to the masses. So that is a really quick way to lose your volunteers. Retaining can also look like having long and short-term opportunities, being creative in your volunteering. Once again, avoiding that favoritism and building that community. Inclusion is valued. They want to belong. Having mentor programs, outings, increasing the skill development through Master Gardener diagnostician programs, all those sorts of things. So this information actually comes from a Gallup poll that was done. The poll was taken during 2023 and they published it in 2024. So it's fairly recent about workplace recognition and retention. And these were some of the things that were mentioned is they want to have input in the process, like the different ways that they can volunteer or retain or do things. They want to have that opportunity to be creative and having that belonging. So use recognition to reflect the culture, goals, and values. Continuously evaluate the ways that you recognize your volunteers and refine your strategies. Those are the biggest things that you can do to really recognize those Gen Z volunteers. But also make sure that it is personal and do it often. Don't do it for every big thing that they do it for every little thing. You want them to know how appreciated they are within your culture and your community. Thank them for, helping up, showing up when nobody else showed up. All those sorts of things. Those go a long way with the Generation Z. We expect thank yous for the big things because we know they're big things. We don't expect the thank yous for the little things, and those go a long way. So different ways that you can recognize your Generation Z volunteers. Handwrite a thank you note. Very simple, very easy. A pack of thank you notes is decently inexpensive. But just having that handwritten letter goes a long way. It means that you took the time out of their day, you wrote their name on that envelope, and that goes a long way. Like Esther mentioned, a lot of our younger Gen Zs are still in high school and they're slowly starting to explore that job world. Having a reference letter from a extension agent, a coordinator, whatever your position may be, can go a long way for a Generation Z person whenever they're looking at volunteer opportunities and work opportunities afterwards. Avoid repetitive gifts and impersonal gifts. We recognize those immediately, and avoid water bottles. A lot of us have our very own water bottle and we are very attached to our water bottles. And so if you give us a water bottle, it'll likely end up in a thrift store or in the back of a cabinet. So when you're planning an event with Gen Z, safety and security should be one of the top things. And this is beyond security in a setting of like, oh yeah, no, we're not holding it in a area that is unsafe, but taking in mind what is the safety of the area. I had a program at a building where I had to walk 30 yards in the dark from the parking lot to the building and at night, and it was not a fun experience, and I will never go back to that building because I did not feel safe on that 30-yard walk. Taking those things in mind whenever you're planning an event can be a very personal way to show you care for the Gen Z, making sure that the area is well lit, that it's ADA accessible, that they have security cameras if it's in a really weird part of town. Just different ways like that can really make somebody feel safe and want to continue to do an event. When advertising, try to look at your social media and see what has good interactions. Where are you getting your most volunteers? If you're interested in what a good Instagram account might look like for Gen Z, the National Parks Instagram is really good. And actually Spark Notes, the like study guide material, they have a really good Instagram as well. And on that note, Gen Z is all about different trends and things. When we say don't fall into it, we want them in a day-to-day English language speaking thing. Don't use our slang, don't use those sorts of things. But when you're trying to get attention for something, really lean into those trends. So currently the trend is brat. It's a brat summer. So brat is all about embracing a playful, confident, and slightly rebellious attitude. Your trends don't have to make sense to you. They just have to make sense to the generation you're trying to communicate with. So one way you can kind of see what trends are going on is you can use ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT what are the current trends or what are the popular memes to see what the generation is interested in. And then, like Esther said, just run it by a member of Gen Z. Make sure that you're using things correctly, that you're not accidentally putting yourself in a really sticky situation. And yeah, image is just for intention, and all the information for your event should be in the comment or the caption underneath, and that should remain professional.
Sorry, once again, I didn't unmute myself. So let's go back. Whoops, whoops, whoops. It is. So, now you've learned from Emily how to do this. Now, why don't we try and have an interactive exercise here, design a volunteer experience for Gen Z. Now, in the back of our head, we're going to be considering, okay, so what are some future volunteer activities are we planning? Can we successfully reach Gen Z volunteers with some form of rich visual marketing? Think about security and safety as part of that. And then with that being in the back of our mind, figure out how to implement visual tactics to attract Gen Z to your future volunteering activities. So for the next maybe 3 minutes, we'll, think about writing a social media post, think about a video that you would record on your phone, and then in 3 minutes, be ready to share that with the group. You can, write it in the chat or you can open your mic. So if you come up with something, go ahead and share it right away in the chat.
And this activity is on the back page of that worksheet, again, in that Google Drive, if you're working on the worksheet.
So anybody ready to share? I know we're not giving you much time here. Right, there've got to be a couple of ideas. You don't have to have a fully fleshed out idea. Do you have a slogan? Oh, looks like we've got some things here. Oh, I like that. I like that. Developing a community garden close enough to school. It could be middle, high school, community college, and the students are able to walk to it and work to it. Team sign up sheet on social media where they can all see who they'll be working with and make it shareable so they can invite their friends and at least two supervisors to offer guidance. Very good. Very good. Um, I like the fact that it's also, providing support to them if in fact they do feel less confident about their gardening knowledge. Anyone else?
Yeah, I really like on that one that everybody can see who they're signing up with, because that's something that I would do, is make sure that I can sign up with somebody that I know.
Absolutely. Well, in the interest of time, maybe we'll move forward and we'll wrap up here.
Yes, well, hopefully we have just a couple more pieces for you. Hopefully we covered the goals that we talked about today in our program objectives. We really appreciate you being on here. We have a couple more things we're going to share, but wanted to, and if you want to reach out to any of us, you definitely can do that. We'll have our contact information in a little bit. Really thinking through, again, like Emily said, not just stereotyping our Gen Zs, but really appreciating and accepting both all their similarities and differences, and how they really can be those wonderful volunteers for us in the Master Gardener world. I loved all the comments about how you've experienced that they don't just want episodic. Some of them do, but they are there for that committed long-term experience and have some great ideas. They care about the environment. They care about our future. They care about hunger, different areas that we cover in this world. And so really great to think about those pieces, really thinking about the similarities and differences, and how we really need all generations to be involved to really have this be a strong program and encourage others to be part of it too. All the ideas, again, you're going to get these slides so you can have some as far as topics or things that they're passionate about in the Master Gardener world. And then those strategies are kind of that list of what you can do to both recruit and retain them and recognize them too. So Esther, I'll have you go to the next slide. One of the things I wanted to mention, and I think is where these invitations have come from, is that we've covered some of this in our Achieving the Extension Mission Through Volunteers course. That is a 7-week national online cohort course. So it's kind of a hybrid. You do some independent work, you do some face-to-face webinars collectively together, and then you're in smaller groups, kind of by discipline. Like we have a whole Master Gardener cohort. In the North Central region of us volunteer specialists, we decided that we didn't have enough access to all of you as extension professionals to really do the in-depth kind of training that we wanted to do. We didn't have the time, but we knew so many that work in the world of Master Gardener, in 4-H development, in everything from master food preservers over on the family and community side, really work with volunteers, but don't always come into our profession really having those skills. I know as a 22-year-old extension agent in South Dakota, I didn't have them. So I would have loved to have an online course like this to take. We've had lots of Master Gardeners. We have Master Gardener coordinator facilitators that help with this course. So just want you to think about participating in that. For those of you in North Central states, since we developed it, you can attend for $100, and your volunteer specialist in your state has the code to put in for that, or you can contact me if you're in the North Central region. For other regions, it's $250. You get lots of wonderful handouts, materials, resources. And again, you have the flyer for that in the Google Drive today. So we'll go to the next slide, and I can drop that in the chat too. Esther and Emily and I have to do reporting in our wonderful pairs reporting system. So we would absolutely love it if you would, and here it.
I got it. Oh, never mind. Rachelle, you muted yourself.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I must have done that when I hit the thing. So we would love for you to share what you learned today with us so that we can report on that and things we could do differently or things we want to maybe think about in the future. The first screen you're sent to is just your state, and the rest of them are just questions about what you learned. So we want to thank you for participating. And if you get a chance at the end here, kind of share or open your mics, we can do some questions, but share your plans for using that information either on the evaluation or in the chat. And then Esther, let's go to the next slide. This is our contact information. So we would love if you have questions, comments. I know all of you network really well at the National Extension Conference on Volunteerism or in your specific focused conferences too. It looks like I want to go to your conference the next time. It looks like it's in an awesome location. Esther also has a great social networking page on the pollinators that you can check out too. And I'll have you go to the next slide, Esther, just to show them that we will be sharing references, the sheet that has all these different references that you can kind of check out, just because some of you had questions and I tried to drop some of them in there, but probably didn't get all of them. There is so much you can read about generations, and even just like Esther pulled some wonderful things just focused on your area of work. So with that, I think we can maybe, should we unshare and then just open it up to questions if you have them. I don't know.
Sure.
Ashley, if you can.
I'm just dropping in the CommBank or the CommBank URL because people were asking about the
Yes,
phone
yes.
anxiety. This was an Australian study. It was not in the United States, but I still think that it does have some bearing on our hotlines.
It is
All right,
real.
so I'll stop sharing here.
I just wanted to mention too, I mean, we're wrapping it up here. We're a few minutes over time. So if anybody has to leave, just make sure you know that our next webinar is in October. We won't even bother sharing our last slides, but anybody that has questions, if the group is willing to stay on and answer those, we can do that for however long anybody needs to. And I can run back through the chat and see if we missed anything.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording while we go ahead and answer some questions.
We just want to say thank you.